There is a moment, late in the evening, when the house grows still. The dishes are done. The phone has stopped buzzing. The television is off. Perhaps the people you share your home with have gone to sleep, or perhaps you live alone now, and the quiet is simply the way things are. You find yourself sitting somewhere familiar, perhaps by a window where the streetlight casts long shadows, perhaps in a chair that has held you through many years, many seasons, many different versions of yourself. In that stillness, with nothing in particular demanding your attention, something interesting happens. You notice your own breathing, the gentle rise and fall of your chest. You hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Perhaps a car passes outside, its headlights briefly sweeping across the ceiling. You feel the weight of your hands resting in your lap, the subtle pressure of the chair against your back. And behind all of this, behind the breathing, behind the sounds, behind the sensations, there seems to be someone watching. Someone is aware of the breathing. Someone who hears the sounds. Someone who feels the sensations. Someone who has been here, it seems, through everything. This watcher feels so constant, so reliable, so undeniably you. But here is a question worth sitting with, not to answer, not to solve, but simply to hold like a smooth stone in the palm. Who is this watcher? And if you look for them, really look, with patient and curious attention, can they actually be found? The familiar sense of I. For most of our lives, we never question the one who watches. It seems so obvious, so fundamental, that questioning it feels almost absurd. Of course, there is a me in here. Of course, someone is experiencing all of this. The very fact that you are hearing these words suggests that someone is listening. The very fact that you understand them suggests that someone is comprehending. When you remember your childhood, perhaps a summer afternoon, the smell of cut grass, the sound of a screen door closing, someone is remembering. When you think about tomorrow, about next week, about the years that may still lie ahead, someone is thinking, planning, wondering. When you feel joy, someone is joyful. When you feel grief, someone is grieving. When you lie awake at night with a mind that will not quiet, someone is lying there, frustrated, wishing for sleep. This sense of a constant observer, an unchanging self sitting behind your eyes, peering out at the world, is perhaps the most intimate thing you know. It feels like the one thing you can be certain of. Everything else may change, may be uncertain, may be open to interpretation. But this sense of being someone, seems beyond doubt. And it has been with you, it seems, since the very beginning. Think back over your life. The decades that have passed. The changes you have witnessed in yourself and in the world around you. You may have changed careers more than once. Raised children who are now grown, who have children of their own. Buried people you loved, parents, perhaps, or friends who left too soon. Moved across cities, across countries. Watched your body age, watched the face in the mirror become someone your younger self might not recognize. Through all of this, something seems to have remained constant. The watcher. The experiencer. The one who says, I. The world changed, but you, the essential you, stayed the same. Or so it seems. But what if this constancy is not quite what it appears to be? What if the watcher is not a permanent resident of this body, but a guest who arrives freshly in each moment, and then dissolves, only to be replaced by another guest so similar, so seamlessly continuous, that you never notice the change? What if the self is not a noun, but a verb? Not a thing that exists, but a process that happens, again and again, so quickly that it creates the illusion of something solid? A closer look. Let us try something together. There is nothing to achieve here, nothing to accomplish. Just a simple experiment in looking. Right now, as you listen to these words, there is awareness happening. This much is clear. You are aware of the sound of this voice. You are aware, perhaps, of where you are sitting, of the room around you, of the time of day. You are aware of a general sense of being present, of being here, of being you. Now, without trying to change anything, without trying to create any particular experience, simply notice. Can you find the one who is aware? Not the thoughts, those come and go, appearing and disappearing like clouds in a vast sky. Not the sensations, those too arise and pass, constantly shifting, never staying the same for long. Not the sounds, they emerge from silence, play for a moment, and return to silence. But the one who knows all of these. The watcher behind the watching. The self behind the seeing, hearing, and feeling. Can it be located? If you look closely, something curious may happen. You may find thoughts about the watcher. Concepts. Ideas. The word I, perhaps, arises in the mind. But these are just more thoughts, they are not the watcher itself. You may find a feeling of being a self. A sense of existing, of being present, of being located somewhere. But this feeling is just another sensation, just another object of awareness. It is not the one who is aware. You may find a sense of location, perhaps behind the eyes, or in the center of the head, or in the chest. But this too is a sensation, a felt sense, an experience. It is not the experiencer. Where is the one who watches all of this? For most of us, when we turn attention toward the observer, we find nothing solid. Just more experience. More thoughts. More sensations. And then another sense of watching those. An infinite regress, like two mirrors facing each other, reflecting reflections into endless depths. It is like trying to see your own eyes directly, without the help of a mirror. You can see what the eyes see, the world in all its colors and forms, but the eyes themselves remain forever out of view. They are the seeing, not something that can be seen. This is not a trick. It is not a philosophical puzzle meant to confuse or frustrate. It is simply an invitation to notice something that has always been true, yet rarely examined. The watcher feels constant, feels solid, feels undeniably real. But when we look for it directly, with simple and patient attention, it cannot be found. What does this mean? How the self is built. There is an old understanding, passed down through centuries of quiet observation by men and women who dedicated their lives to examining the nature of the mind, that explains why the watcher seems so real even though it cannot be located. The self, this understanding suggests, is not a thing. It is a process. It is something that gets constructed, moment by moment, through a chain of experiences that happen so quickly and so seamlessly that we never see the construction happening. By the time we notice the self, it appears to have always been there. But it was built, just now, from raw materials that are themselves constantly changing. Imagine it this way. First, there is contact. The senses meet the world. Light touches the eyes. Sound reaches the ears. The body makes contact with the chair, the air, and the ground. Thought arises in the mind, meeting awareness. This contact is the beginning, the place where inside and outside meet. From this contact, feeling emerges. Not emotion yet, not the complex stories we tell ourselves, but something simpler. A bare quality that colors the experience. Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, neither one nor the other. This feeling tone is subtle, almost invisible, but it is always there, shading every moment of experience. Then comes perception. The mind recognizes and labels what has been contacted. This shape is a chair. That sound is a voice. This sensation is tiredness. That thought is a memory. Perception carves the seamless flow of experience into recognizable pieces, gives them names, and places them in categories. And then, almost instantly, something else arises. A subtle movement of wanting or not wanting. A leaning toward what is pleasant, a pulling back from what is unpleasant, a kind of indifference toward what is neutral. This is craving, though not the dramatic desire we usually think of. It is quieter than that. The faintest inclination. A whisper of preference. Finally, clinging. The mind grasps the experience, wraps itself around it, and takes it personally. This is not just tiredness, it is my tiredness. This is not just a memory, it is my memory. The experience has been claimed, owned, and woven into the story of me. And suddenly, there is a self. A watcher. An experiencer who seems to have been there all along, who seems to be permanent and solid and real. But this self was not there before the chain began. It was assembled, constructed from the raw materials of contact, feeling, perception, craving, and clinging. And because this construction happens so quickly, so seamlessly, so automatically, it feels like the self was always there, waiting to be discovered. It was not discovered. It was created. The illusion of continuity. Perhaps you have seen an old film reel, the kind that runs through a projector, each frame passing before a bright light. If you hold the film up to the light and look at it closely, you see that it is made of separate images. Frozen moments. Still photographs, arranged in sequence. There is no motion in any single frame. Each one is perfectly still. And yet, when the projector runs, and the frames pass quickly enough, something magical happens. The brain stitches them together. Motion appears. People walk across the screen. Trees sway in the wind. Rain falls. Life seems to flow continuously, seamlessly, from one moment to the next. But the motion is not in the frames. The motion is created by the mind, which cannot perceive the individual images quickly enough to see them as separate. And so it smooths them together, fills in the gaps, and produces the experience of continuous movement. The self may work the same way. Each moment of awareness is like a single frame in a film. It arises, dependent on specific conditions, a sense organ, an object, a certain quality of attention, and then it passes. It does not continue. It ends. And another moment arises. And another. And another. But because these moments are so similar to each other, and because the transitions between them are so seamless, the mind does what it does with the film frames. It weaves them together into a continuous narrative. A story of a single watcher who was here a moment ago, is here now, and will be here in the next moment. But perhaps the watcher of this moment is not the same watcher as a moment ago. Perhaps what we call I is actually a series, a stream of brief experiences, each one giving rise to the next, none of them permanent, none of them solid, none of them existing for more than the blink of an eye. The river looks continuous from the bank. Stand by any river and watch it flow, and it seems like one thing, a single, constant presence moving through the landscape. But the water flowing past right now is not the water that flowed past an hour ago. That water is long gone, moved downstream, perhaps already reaching the sea. The river is always new, always fresh, always different. Perhaps the self is like this river. Not a stone sitting in the water, unchanging, but the water itself, flowing, changing, never the same from one moment to the next, yet appearing continuous to the casual observer. In the scene, just the scene. There is a teaching, very old, that offers a simple instruction for seeing through the illusion of self. In the scene, let there be just the scene. In the heart, just the heart. In the sensed, just the sensed. In the thought, just the thought. At first, this may sound abstract, philosophical, perhaps even meaningless. But its meaning is profoundly practical. It points to something that can be experienced directly, right now, without any special knowledge or preparation. When you see something, say, a tree outside your window, there is the visual experience of the tree. Colors, shapes, light and shadow, the texture of bark, the movement of leaves. This is what is actually happening. Just seeing. Pure visual experience, arising and passing moment by moment. But almost immediately, before you even notice it happening, the mind adds something. I see the tree. That's a beautiful tree. I remember a tree like that from when I was young. I wonder how old it is. I should spend more time in nature. What was pure seeing has now become my seeing. The raw experience has been wrapped in a self. An I has been inserted into the middle of the experience, and suddenly it is not just seeing, it is a chapter in the ongoing story of me. This addition happens so quickly, so automatically, that we rarely notice it. By the time we become aware of the experience, the self is already there, already claiming ownership, already weaving the moment into its narrative. And this, according to the old understanding, is the moment when suffering enters. Not because the tree is painful. Not because seeing is painful. Not because there is anything wrong with trees or with vision. But because the creation of a me who owns the experience also creates a me who can be threatened, disappointed, hurt, and lost. If there is an I who sees beauty, there is also an I who can be deprived of beauty. If there is an I who remembers, there is also an I who can forget, who can lose the past, who can be left with nothing but fading memories of what once was. The teaching suggests, what if you could experience seeing without adding the seer? What if the tree could simply be seen, purely and directly, without wrapping the experience in the story of self? This is not an instruction to become detached or cold. It is not about pushing away experience or becoming numb to life. Quite the opposite. It is an invitation to experience more directly, more intimately, more fully, without the layer of self that actually creates separation between you and the world. If this way of looking at experience brings you a sense of quiet curiosity, a willingness to simply notice what is already happening, you might find value in continuing this exploration. Consider subscribing to Buddha Coha and sharing this reflection with someone who might appreciate a moment of stillness in their day. The suffering of ownership. There is a kind of suffering that comes not from what happens to us, but from our relationship to what happens. Not from the events of life, but from owning those events. When we believe there is a solid self who experiences life, a permanent watcher at the center of all our experiences, that self can be hurt, threatened, diminished, enhanced. It becomes something that must be protected, defended, maintained, and improved. We cling to pleasant experiences because they seem to enhance the self, to confirm its importance, to add to its story. We push away unpleasant experiences because they seem to diminish the self, to threaten its security, to suggest that perhaps the story is not going as well as we hoped. And when change comes, as it always does, as it must, the self feels endangered. Every loss is a loss to me. Every disappointment is my disappointment. Every sign of aging, every failing of memory, every friend who passes away, every dream that remains unfulfilled, all of it happens to this I that feels so real and so vulnerable. But what if the self was never solid in the first place? What if there were never a permanent watcher to be hurt or protected? What if the I that seems to suffer was itself just another arising, just another moment in the stream, no more permanent than the suffering itself? This is not just a comforting idea. It is not philosophical speculation meant to distract from pain. It is something that can be seen directly, through patient and careful observation, in the laboratory of your own experience. When we sit quietly and watch, really watch, we can catch the mind in the act of constructing a self. We can see the chain of contact, feeling, perception, craving, and clinging. We can notice the moment when raw experience becomes my experience. And in that noticing, there is a small space. A tiny gap. A moment when the chain has not yet completed itself, when the self has not yet been built, when experience is just experience, without an owner. In that gap, something unexpected can be found. Not emptiness in the sense of loss or deprivation, but openness, spaciousness, a kind of freedom that does not depend on circumstances, that is not threatened by change, that does not need protection. The story of the monk and the flag. There is an old story, often told, about two monks who stood in a courtyard watching a flag flutter in the wind. One monk, observing, said, "The flag is moving." The other monk shook his head. "No," he replied. "The wind is moving. The flag is only responding." They debated back and forth, each presenting arguments for his position, each certain that he had correctly identified the source of the movement. A teacher happened to pass through the courtyard. Seeing the two monks in animated discussion, he stopped to listen. After a few moments, he spoke. "Neither the flag nor the wind is moving," he said quietly. "What moves is your own mind." And then he walked on, leaving the monks to sit with his words. This story has been interpreted in many ways over the centuries, and perhaps its meaning is different for each person who hears it. But one possibility is this: we tend to locate movement, change, experience, and meaning out there, in the world, in objects, in other people, in circumstances. The flag moves. The wind blows. Things happen to us. And we create a self in here, a watcher, an observer, a permanent entity who perceives and judges and reacts to the world outside. But perhaps both the seen and the seer are part of the same flow. Perhaps the division between watcher and watched, between self and world, between inside and outside, is not something we discover in reality, it is something the mind creates. When this division softens, even for a moment, something opens. The sense of being trapped inside a separate self, looking out at a foreign world through small windows called eyes, this sense begins to ease. What remains is nothing. It is not void or blankness. It is simply this. Experience, flowing. Life, living itself. Without the added burden of a self who must make sense of it all. Awareness itself is not permanent. This may be the most subtle point in all of this. And it is worth approaching gently, without grasping after understanding. Many people, even those who have begun to question the solidity of the self, hold on to awareness as the final resting place. The ultimate ground. I may not be my thoughts, they say. I see that thoughts come and go, and I am not them. I may not be my emotions, they rise and fall, but I remain. I may not be my body, it changes constantly, ages, transforms. But surely I am the awareness that knows all of this. The pure consciousness behind the show. The witness that never changes. This awareness can feel like the ultimate self. The one true identity. The ground beneath all other grounds. But even this, when examined closely, may not be what it seems. Awareness does not exist on its own, floating free of conditions. It arises when specific conditions come together, and it ceases when those conditions change. When the eye meets light, visual awareness arises. Remove the eye, or remove the light, and visual awareness ceases. It does not go somewhere else. It does not retreat to a deeper level. It simply ends. When the ear meets sound, auditory awareness arises. In silence, auditory awareness ceases. When the mind meets a thought, mental awareness arises. Between thoughts, there is a gap, and awareness of thought is absent. Awareness is not one thing. It is many things, arising and passing, dependent on conditions that are themselves arising and passing. It is not an unchanging ground. It is part of the same flowing river. This is not meant to be frightening. It does not mean that when awareness ceases, something terrible happens. It simply means that even the most subtle sense of, I am aware, even this is not a permanent self, not an eternal soul, not a fixed point in a changing universe. When we see this clearly, the search for a permanent self can finally rest. Not because we have found the self and destroyed it. Not because we have achieved some special state. But because we see, with gentle clarity, that there was never a solid self to find or destroy. Only process. Only flow. Only the endless dance of conditions arising and passing, giving birth to experiences that themselves arise and pass. What remains when the search ends? Perhaps you are wondering, if there is no solid self, no permanent watcher, no unchanging awareness, what is left? What remains? This is a natural question. And it is worth noting that the answer cannot be captured in words. Language always creates the impression of things, nouns, objects, entities. But what remains is not a thing. Still, we can point. What remains is life itself. Experience itself. The vast, open, flowing dance of sensation and perception and thought, without the burden of a separate self who must own it all, protect it all, make sense of it all. Sounds still arise. Colors still appear. Thoughts still come and go. But there is no longer anyone standing apart from these experiences, watching them from a distance, claiming ownership. This is not nihilism. It is not the belief that nothing exists or that nothing matters. If anything, when the weight of self lightens, life becomes more vivid, not less. Colors are brighter. Sounds are clearer. The face of another person becomes more real, more present, more precious. Compassion becomes more natural because the rigid boundary between self and other has softened. The suffering of another is no longer something that happens over there to someone separate. It is simply suffering, arising in this shared space of experience. Joy, too, becomes more accessible. It is no longer dependent on the self being enhanced, on getting what I want. It can arise freely, in response to beauty, to kindness, to the simple miracle of being. There is a freedom in this that is difficult to describe. Not the freedom to do whatever we want, that is a different kind of freedom. But freedom from the constant work of constructing and maintaining a self. Freedom from the endless effort of protecting, defending, and propping up an illusion. The river flows. And there is no one separate from the flowing who must worry about where it goes. The kindness in this seeing. It is important to say, this exploration is not meant to be harsh. It is not an attack on you or on anything you believe. If you have lived 50, 60, 70, 80 years with a strong sense of self, and that self has helped you navigate the world, raise a family, build a career, survive hardships, there is no need to tear it down. No one is asking you to destroy anything. This is not about destruction. It is about seeing. Simply seeing what is already the case. And what is already the case is not threatening. It is not dangerous. It is simply the way things are, and have always been, whether noticed or not. The self was never solid. And yet, life continued. Beauty was perceived. Love was given and received. Meaning was found and created. Kindness was offered. Tears were shed. Laughter rang out. All of it, all of this rich and complex life, happened without a permanent watcher at the center. This seeing, when it arises naturally through quiet observation, does not leave us cold or empty. It leaves us lighter, more spacious, more able to meet life as it comes, without constantly filtering it through the demands and fears of a self that was never really there. The frames dissolve, but the light remains. Let us return, one last time, to the image of the film. When the movie ends, and the projector stops, the screen goes blank. The story that seemed so real, the characters, the conflicts, the dramatic moments of joy and sorrow, all of it dissolves. It was made of light and shadow, flickering images projected onto an empty surface. Yet something remains. The screen is still there, unchanged by the story that played across it, unmarked by the dramas that seemed so vivid, so important. The space in which the movie appeared is just as it was before the film began. Perhaps something like this is true for us. The self, the watcher, the story of me, all of it is flickering, arising and passing. Never solid, never permanent, never what it seemed to be. But the open space in which these experiences appear, that is not damaged by the flickering, not diminished by the passing of any particular experience, not dependent on the story continuing. It simply is. Quiet. Unchanging. At rest. Not a self. Not a soul. Not something that can be grasped or owned or protected. Just this. This moment. This breath. This awareness cannot find itself because it is not a thing to be found. No conclusion, only an invitation. There is no neat ending to this exploration. No final answer to take away and put on a shelf. No conclusion that wraps everything up and tells you what to believe. Only an invitation. When you find yourself in a quiet moment, perhaps late at night when sleep will not come, perhaps early in the morning before the world wakes, perhaps in the middle of an ordinary day when suddenly everything grows still, notice the sense of a watcher. The one who seems to be behind your eyes. The one who seems to be experiencing your life. The one who seems to have been there through everything. And then, gently, without forcing anything, look for it. Not with the mind's concepts and categories. Not with effort or strain. Just with simple, patient, curious attention. What do you find? Perhaps thoughts about the self. Perhaps a feeling of being located somewhere. Perhaps a sense of familiarity, of me-ness, of being someone. But the watcher itself, the one who is looking, the subject behind all objects, can it be found? And if it cannot be found, if every time you look, you find only more experiences, more thoughts, more sensations, but never the one who is supposed to be having them, what does that mean? Not as a philosophical conclusion, not as something to believe, but as a lived experience. Right now, in this moment, these questions do not need answers. They need only to be held. Gently, patiently, like a smooth stone resting in an open palm. The holding itself is the practice. The looking itself is the path. And in the looking, something may shift. Not dramatically. Not with fireworks and revelations. But quietly, like the first light of dawn, changing everything without effort. Thank you for being here. For taking this time to sit with these words. For bringing your years of experience, your wisdom, and your willingness to look. If you would like to continue this quiet exploration, consider subscribing to Buddha Coha and pressing the notification bell. Each week, we share another moment of stillness, another invitation to look within, another opportunity to rest in what cannot be grasped. You do not have to arrive anywhere. You do not have to become anything. You do not have to find what cannot be found. You need only be here, as you already are, watching the watcher disappear, and in that disappearing, discovering what was never lost. The river flows without a watcher. The frames flicker without an audience. And somewhere, in the stillness between moments, there is peace that needs no self to hold it.